This morning's session is titled Networking for Introverts. I know that I'm excited to hear what they're going to be sharing with us today. Please note that this session will be offered in English and in French simultaneously. To view the French session, please return to the agenda and click on the link Le réseautage pour les introvertis. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I am here on the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. The Mi'kmaq peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and I encourage all of you to acknowledge the land you're on as well. Career Bootcamp is the largest conference in the GC, and the only goal is to support you in your career journey. As we move through today's session, please share your questions by using the Q&A button in the language of your choice located at the bottom of your screen. You can vote for questions that you like by clicking on the thumbs up button, and the moderator will ask the panelists the questions with the most votes. As with all Fin sessions, this session will be recorded so that you can view it at a later date. Please note that the opinions shared by our guests today are simply their own opinions and experiences. We do choose the best of the best to share with you, but their views are not necessarily those of the GC. And now, without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Natalie, who's going to take us through the session today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Career Bootcamp, and we're really excited to have you today at the session on networking for introverts. So while on the surface, it may seem that extroverts have an advantage when it comes to networking, often introverts have a more strategic approach to networking. So today in our conversation, we're going to be breaking the ice and having a meaningful conversation with our fellow colleagues here today, virtually, about the ways that we can feel authentic as we navigate through the networking environment. Please note that everything shared today is a representation of the thoughts and perspectives of the speakers. Nothing shared today represents the thoughts of our panelists' employers. So today I will be moderating. I started my career at the ASDC Innovation Lab, moving on to strategic services and public affairs, a quick assignment at Policy Horizons to launch the Canada Beyond 150, and then joined ISED recently to lead digital transformation, work in parliamentary affairs. And I have found that networking has been a key piece of navigating my journey through the GC community. And I advocate for networking as a key means of sort of making your way through the GC experience. So I'm going to pass it on to our panelists today. So I'll just do a quick introduction. Madison Meach is a senior corporate officer at the Government of Canada, and she's been leading communications, research, and innovation. Madison has been a proud public servant for over 4 years with the government. And her experience ranges from social media, advertising, program, and strategic communications. And she's an advocate for growth within the public service. She hopes to continue to make it a competitive employer, and she's constantly advocating for growth and innovation. She's also currently pursuing her master's in science and digital transformation and hopes to bring her skills and knowledge back to the GOC. Our other panelist, Darlene, describes herself as shy and quiet as a child. She prefers to avoid the center of attention, but she's happy to bring her authentic and introverted self to this session. She's currently a senior program officer with the Government of Canada. And since disclosing her mental illness in 2015, she shares her story of help and hope through the Federal Speakers Bureau on mental health and her blog, A Day in the Life of Darlene. She's also an advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion in the GC as a proud member of the Public Services Pride Network's Professional Development Action Committee. So let's launch right in. But before we launch in, we do have a poll for you today with a few questions. So let the poll be shared with all of you. There's 3 key questions today, and we'll give you a few minutes to answer. Wow. So it looks like most people in the audience today find that extroverts do have more advantage of developing a network and a reputation. However, a vast majority of individuals today identify as introverts. So I guess this session is definitely appropriate. And we also see, but we see that, a vast majority also do not feel comfortable sort of in social settings. So hopefully today's conversation will allow you to kind of explore how we might navigate the networking space as introverts. So let's dive right into the questions. So the first question, and I'll pass it to Darlene first. Can you explain the difference between introversion versus extroversion? How do I know which one I am?
Thanks, Natalie. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. It's a pleasure to be here today with all of you online. And I want to thank, first of all, Finn and Natalie and Madison for joining me on this session. So like me, if you're an introvert, you love to read. So I suggest looking and reading the book Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain to know the difference. Which, by the way, when I read out the title to my partner, who's an extrovert through and through, said he found it to be a personal attack. So there's a quiz in the book that asks you to respond with true or false questions. Like, I prefer one-on-one conversations to group activities. I often prefer to express myself in writing. I enjoy solitude. I enjoy work that allows me to dive in with few interruptions. I tend to think before speaking and do my best work on my own. So it will be no surprise to all of you introverts participating today that I answered true to all 20 questions with one exception, which was I seem to care less than my peers about wealth, fame, and status. Because although I'm not trying to be wealthy or famous, I do care about my career an awful lot, and I'm sure most folks here today do as well. So the more you answer true to the questions, the more introverted you probably are. And if you answered roughly with an equal number of true and false, then you may be an ambivert, which is defined as someone whose personality has a balance of introvert and extrovert features. Susan goes on to say that even if you answered every single question as an introvert or extrovert, it doesn't mean your behavior is predictable across all circumstances. We can't say that every introvert is a bookworm, although I'd argue this is true, or that every extrovert wears lampshades at parties, which my partner has never done, and I would be very upset if he did, any more than we can say that every woman is a natural consensus builder and every man loves contact sports. Actually, there's an excellent meme that I wish I could share in the chat with you that says, books, helping introverts and avoid conversation since 1454. But just like mental health, our level of introversion, extroversion, or ambiversion is not static. There's a continuum, and it changes, and both pay off differently at different times. This is actually what's known as the trade-off theory of evolution, in which a particular trait is neither all good nor bad, but a mix of pros and cons whose survival value varies according to circumstance. The takeaway from this: labels are for jars, not people. So don't waste time trying to fit in. Know yourself and then simply be yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Darlene, for that answer. Madison, do you have anything you'd like to add in?
Yeah, I think when I went about answering this question, I think it was very much along the same lines as Darlene. I think it's so intuitive to the person themselves rather than this clinical definition of what everyone else thinks being introverted or extroverted is. I think it really is a feeling of how you engage and how you feel in social situations and how you navigate your own world. And my own definition of that may look completely different for Darlene, and it may look completely different for someone else. And it's not to say that if you land somewhere on this spectrum of introversion and extroversion that, oh, you can't be in our group of introverts anymore, you have to go to the extroverted side. It really just comes down to an intuitive feeling and knowing yourself. And I also think it has a lot to do of how we spend our energy. I get my energy by being alone and with my own thoughts and reading, and I find extroverts get their energy by being in social situations and interacting. And then it goes vice versa for how it's spent. I have to spend my energy to be in social situations, and extroverts have to spend their energy to be alone. So I really think it comes down to energy and then the situation at hand. It's such a fluid definition, and it's kind of just like a, if you know type thing. You know yourself, and you know how you feel, then I would say wherever you think you land, that's where you land.
So the next question I have for the both of you, and we'll start with Madison this time. How can we create a safer space for introverts to facilitate networking?
So I feel like it's such a loaded question. Because again, like some people may require or desire a bit more in terms of the creation of safe spaces. But in my experience, I think that having the extroverts in the room available to lean on has always been the best way for me to feel comfortable and safe in larger social situations. And by that, I mean where the extrovert I'm with has the self-reflection to ask themselves, okay, how much space am I taking up? And it's not necessarily physical space, it's conversational space, it's social space, and asking themselves, when was the last time I asked someone else a question? And am I listening to listen, or am I listening just to respond? And when extroverts have that level of self-awareness, and they can reflect, it makes it so much easier for them to open a very, very clear door for an introvert to join the conversation, because then they engage and they ask direct questions, because that's what I require. For example, it takes a lot out of me to read the social cues and read the room of when I'm supposed to jump into a conversation. So even sometimes when I have something to say, I just sit waiting to be called on. So when I have an extrovert to lean on and they know to open that door for me, it just makes it so much more comfortable for myself personally.
Darlene, what are your thoughts?
I share Madison's thoughts for sure, but the first thing that came to mind when I was answering this question and preparing my answer, how to create a safer space for introverts, I would say do like Shopify and cancel all recurring meetings of more than 2 people. I'm only half kidding there. What works for me and what I can suggest for good team ground rules are, when it comes to virtual best practices, make cameras on voluntary, not mandatory. And this may seem counterintuitive if you want to encourage networking, but by leaving my camera off for at least the start of a meeting, I can acclimatize myself and get a sense of the level of safety within the space, and then decide, do I want to join and come off or come on camera rather. Another suggestion I have for virtual spaces is to use breakout rooms for smaller group discussions, making it easier to build a connection, which is particularly helpful if I don't know any of the other participants. Also, build time in for breaks so the introverts can have some time alone to recharge. For in-person events, if it's a small group, as the host, and if possible, give participants options for the venue and type of meeting. For instance, I'd much rather go for a walk and talk than sit in a boardroom, and I'd be much more relaxed in a Tim's or a Starbucks. Or if I'm feeling really brave, I might even accept a breakfast or lunch offer. Another idea for larger in-person events is to make introductions for the introverts. And like Madison alluded to, establish a buddy system whereby the introverts are paired with the extroverts. So having a buddy with me would help ease my anxiety a lot. And I'd probably stick around as opposed to escaping to my safe space at home at the first available interval. So finally, if you want the introverts to feel included, then don't make us feel unprepared or put us on the spot. So for either virtual or in-life networking events, give us as much information and time in advance as possible, such as the agenda, any prep material, questions, decks, and as well, ample time to prepare. So my takeaway for this question is meet people where they're at. Give them options that enable introverts and extroverts to be at their best. And ask folks what they prefer.
Awesome. Thank you, Madison and Darlene, for those answers. And my next question, hopefully we can get a quick response so we can move on to the Q&A quickly from the audience. But how can we better observe the behaviors to determine the level of introversion of someone before we interact with them? Any thoughts, Madison?
Yeah, I will be super succinct in saying don't rely on your own observations. I think we all think we're much better observers than we are. And also, a lot of introverts come off very extroverted when need be. I am one of those people. And when I do open up to the fact that I'm introverted, I am met with a challenge almost and disbelief. And I almost have to plead my case of being introverted because I've been able to adapt and I've been able to adopt this extroverted social personality in those situations that require them. So to Darlene's point before, you just have to ask people. Don't make assumptions and don't try to observe. Just simply ask people, hey, are you more introverted or extroverted? I would never know because I don't see the world through your eyes.
And Darlene, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah. So I alluded in my bio that I was described as shy as a child. And so your observations, you can naturally see me being nervous, especially when I'm in the spotlight right now, or when I'm being evaluated. Other behavioral signs may be waiting for everyone to speak up or being called on to speak during a meeting before chiming in, like Madison said, or not speaking at all. I prefer to listen before talking, having one-on-one discussions as opposed to larger team meetings. And in the case of building a network, prefer to have a coffee and chat session as opposed to larger mixer events. If you're in Finland, actually, they're known for their introvertedness. And there's a joke that goes, how can you tell if a Finn likes you? He's staring at your shoes instead of his own. So my takeaway for this is to be observant, pay attention to people's cues, which is something introverts are naturally gifted at doing. And like Madison said, don't make assumptions based on one interaction with someone. Things change day to day. And some days I actually prefer to be a little more extroverted and want to interact and speak up more, particularly if the topic is something I'm really passionate about. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So let's move on to the Q&A. It looks like everyone's kind of already been jumping in there and asking a few questions. So I will dive right in to the one that got the most votes, or the ones with the higher votes. Let's see. So the first one, do you think there's specific lines of work that introverts do better at in the GC environment? Darlene, do you want to start?
Sure. I would say in my particular situation, because I work for Canada Border Services, I am not inclined to be a border services officer, and my introvertedness, sort of lends to that. So, being armed, being on for their entire shift, dealing with the public, is not something for me. I prefer to be in the background in a supportive role like I am now. So I work within the Uniform Issuance and Policy Unit, and I do mainly comms work and policy. So it's a lot of writing and being in a nice quiet environment like at home or in an office, where I can focus on what I'm good at, which is writing and answering questions. So giving support to our BSOs on the front line. That's where I excel. Madison, I'm not sure about you.
Yeah, I think it's twofold too, where yes, there's definitely going to be, certain lines of work that we would naturally excel in. However, I wouldn't say that it would get in the way of pursuing a passion that maybe doesn't align with directly with our personality. Me as an introvert, if I'm super passionate about something, I just push right through and bulldoze through it. I think we all have like natural tendencies and natural career paths that could happen for us, but it may not just be where we want to go. So we just gotta find a way somehow.
So the next question that got the most votes was, even though I know most people are friendly about making professional connections, I can't help but feel I am bothering people if I approach them. Any suggestions on how to navigate that feeling and still make connections in the GC? Madison, I'll pass it over to you.
Navigating the feeling, I unfortunately do not have advice for, because I feel the exact same way. I feel like I bother people all the time. I feel like I bug people all the time. But I've tried to flip it into being resourceful and, using the knowledge of others to my advantage. And I try to have a lot of self-talk that reflects on that and switches the connotation that I give, my requests or my emails to strangers, just saying, hi, like, I'd really love to get to know you and your work. And there is a stat out there that says when you message people with a favor, they're more inclined to help you, because people like helping people naturally. It makes them feel good and it makes us feel good. So I just try to repeat that in my head a lot.
Darlene, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, like Madison, I would say that's really where for instance, I'm in a pool right now, so I'm looking for a job as a team lead. And that's really enabled me to work on my networking skills by reaching out to managers and saying, hey, I'm part of this pool, hire me. So it's pushed me to be more extroverted and overcome that fear. Just by being very polite and respectful in your approach. Just typing, I'm doing a lot of cold calling or cold messaging right now. So just saying, hey, I just wanted to find out whether or not you're looking for a team lead. And if so, I'm part of this pool, and at your convenience, I'd love to have a discussion. So it forces us as introverts, I think, to be more outgoing and make those connections, which are so very important for networking and for future career prospects in the government, because maybe they're not hiring right now, but they may be in the future, or they know someone within their own network that's looking for an awesome person like me. So yeah, thanks.
So another question we have is along the lines of, someone says that they're highly introverted, and they're suffering with anxiety/depression. How can they sort of advocate for themselves with their managers and find support to better meet their career goals while also addressing the fact that they're extremely introverted? within the GC environment. Madison, do you have any thoughts, or Darlene?
Sorry, Natalie. I just wanted to jump in. I know exactly what that feels like, living with depression and anxiety myself, and being more introverted on top of that. It makes it really hard to speak up for yourself. So, you know, disclosing mental illness is a personal choice. It's always up to the individual. You have to think about your health first and foremost, and your career second. You know, I've learned that sometimes the hard way. So really, it takes a lot of courage to you know, have a conversation with your manager whereby you say that, you know, you can leave it more. You don't have to, you know, disclose everything. That's not a requirement, but simply asking them, you know, and presenting it as, this is what will help me be my best and do my best work, you know? So looking at solutions, and then whether or not you feel comfortable disclosing your mental illness is up to you. So it depends really very much on the relationship you have with your manager. So if it's someone that you trust and they've established a safe space for you, then by all means, you know, this is what I'm living with, and this is how we end the stigma around mental health and mental illness. That's why I disclosed mine in 2015, is because we need people to speak up and make this more normal, because mental health is health, right? So we want to make it normalized in order to end the stigma around it. Living with depression and anxiety does not prevent me from contributing as a public servant, and making the public service a better place. So it really depends on your own personal situation. So I'd reflect upon it before making a decision. But really, I'd also encourage any managers participating to put that on their agenda, you know, to make mental health an agenda item by saying, this is a safe space to open up about your mental health, you know, and providing that reassurance. It needs leadership. It needs to come from you as a manager or a leader to make it safe to talk about. So those are my thoughts on that question. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing, Darlene. That was really thought-provoking. I'm going to move on to the next question, and Madison, I'll pass this question on to you just because we're tight on time. And the question that I have for you, Madison, as an introvert, how do you prepare before going to an event that will force you to be more outgoing?
I try to get as much information about the event as humanly possible. If it's in person, where am I parking? Where am I going? What does it look like? What activities are going to be involved? I pretty much plan every single second. And I also try to plan around, you know, the subject matter. So I have, you know, conversation pieces in my back pocket. And also just ensuring that I'm watching my own meter of, okay, am I getting a little exhausted? Am I being pushed too far right now? And knowing when to take a break, or even knowing when to step out, and ensuring that I have that mindset going in really helps me prepare for when I have to be a little more extroverted.
Thanks so much for sharing that with us. So the both of you have been an absolute wealth of knowledge. I know we all learned a lot, and I will definitely be returning to this recording the next time I have questions about this topic. If you want to know more about any of these topics, check out the CBC 2023 Wiki resource page, which I think they shared the link in the chat. And on that note, I'll pass it back to the FYN team to provide our closing.
Thanks so much, friends. I learned some things too. Thanks for sharing your experiences and your point of view. We do have one last polling question for you. The results of this poll will not be shared, but we'd really like to know if this session was a good use of your time. Maybe it wasn't long enough, but was it a good use of your time, and did you learn something? We'd like to thank you today for joining us. In addition to this session, later on today, we'll be discussing networking to stand out at 1 o'clock and regional career development in a hybrid world at 2:30. There's also an opportunity to network with other GC employees, which will take place in Wonder Me from 4 until 5. The link for all of these sessions is back out in the V Expo on the agenda. All of the resources from today's session will be uploaded onto our wiki, as will the link to the recording on our YouTube channel. We hope to see you at other events throughout Career Bootcamp. Thank you again to our moderator and panelists. Have a great day.